Amanda had been working as an EMS doctor for about 10 years and had long gotten used to the fact that she needed to be prepared for anything when going out on a call. The woman had consciously decided to dedicate her life to medicine. Her decision was partly influenced by her mother's example, who worked as a therapist at a city clinic. From an early age, Amanda imagined herself as a doctor, and when her mother wasn't home, she would put on her white coat and admire her reflection in the mirror. Her first patients were the neighborhood cats and dogs whom she loved dearly. In school, Amanda focused on subjects that would help her get into med school in the future. Years passed, and her childhood dream became a reality. Working as an EMS doctor, Amanda knew that she was doing an important job. Her superiors and colleagues loved and appreciated the young woman for her professionalism. While things were mostly good at work, her family life wasn't as successful. Her relationship with her husband, George, was marked by a considerable degree of coldness and indifference. George held a position as a deputy director in a trading company and often went on lengthy business trips, which saddened Amanda. "Darling, I feel like you spend too much time traveling. I only see you for 3 days a week at the most. The rest of the time you're either in business meeting or on the road, crossing one state after another," Amanda brought up. "But that isn't my fault. That's how my job is. And if it weren't for my job, we wouldn't have this beautiful house, our car, or the amount that we have in our bank account," George retorted. He always brought those conversations back to the subject of money, hinting that his income was much higher than Amanda's. But Amanda didn't care about the money. She valued the harmony in their relationship more than any material possessions. This was the main difference between her and George, who was a very practical person. It didn't seem all that important at first, but then it turned into a big problem for their family. But the most significant problem for Amanda was her inability to have children, which turned her life into a living hell. As a doctor, she couldn't help herself much since there's no fighting genetics, and either God grants the couple children or he doesn't. Meanwhile, George was convinced that it was Amanda who was to blame for the family's inability to have children. "I don't have any problems. You can be sure of that. But you should consider consulting a specialist." Frankly speaking, Amanda couldn't understand why her husband was so certain that she was the problem. Oftentimes, both partners have problems, and finding a solution requires joint efforts. But George was used to giving orders to his subordinates in the company, and he transferred this practice into their family life, which put Amanda in a rather unenviable position. They had been married for 7 years, but they didn't really have any moments in their life that felt like lasting memories in their minds. There weren't many fights in their married life. Nevertheless, George was almost always the one to start them. Amanda attributed everything to her inability to have children, thinking that it was the cause of all of their problems. "So what's the problem? Just adopt a child and that would be the end of it. Why does everything have to be so complicated and dramatic?" her colleague Maggie said reproachfully. Amanda sighed sadly. "I would gladly do that, but George is adamant about it. He only wants to have a biological child." Maggie looked at her colleague with disapproval, as if she weren't seeing a grown woman in front of her, but rather some inexperienced schoolgirl. If she were in that situation, she would have long put George in his place and imposed her own rules of the game. But Amanda wasn't like that, so she always ended up being the victim in this relationship, while George considered himself the predator or the alpha male. Over the years of marriage, Amanda had become so accustomed to her husband's dissatisfaction that she always took the blame for all of their fights. Not a day went by without the woman blaming herself for her inability to have children or achieve her goals. That day, while Amanda was sitting in her office and waiting for the next call, she felt sad and tried not to think about the empty house that she'd have to return to after her shift. George had left for a business trip the day before, and according to the most modest estimates, he wouldn't be back for at least 2 days. And if the negotiations took longer than expected, it could be 3. The dispatcher's call interrupted Amanda's sorrowful thoughts. "Respond to a call on Main Street, house number 12, 5-year-old girl with a high fever. Most likely flu or tonsillitis." "Roger that," Amanda replied and started getting ready. Soon she was already in the ambulance, heading to the address she was provided and wondering what she would have to face this time. Calls involving little children were always unpredictable, since the child often can't explain what's wrong or where it hurts. Finally, they arrived at the correct house, and Amanda noticeably tensed up as she grabbed her medical bag. She got out of the vehicle, approached the door, and rang the doorbell a couple of times. Soon, she heard someone's footsteps on the other side of the door, and then a charming woman in her 30s appeared at the door. "Hello, please come to the living room. My daughter Tina is already waiting for you." Amanda nodded understandingly and followed the woman into the house. Soon she saw a 5-year-old girl with a warm scarf wrapped around her neck. "Well, sweetheart, what's bothering you?" Amanda asked. Tina tried to answer, but all she managed to get out was some unintelligible croak. Examining the girl's throat, Amanda immediately noticed the enlarged tonsils and the characteristic white coating on them. "You have tonsillitis, dear. I'll give you an injection for your fever and prescribe antibiotics. Your mother will take you to the pediatrician tomorrow. I think they will add a few more medications to the prescription," Amanda said while packing her medical bag. "Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would do," the girl's mother said gratefully. Amanda gave her an encouraging smile and advised her not to worry too much. As Amanda was about to leave the living room, a man emerged from the adjacent room, and his appearance shocked the doctor to the core. The thing was that standing before her was none other than her own husband, George. The scene was so absurd that Amanda was momentarily stunned and froze in place. She was 100% sure that George was on a business trip in Colorado. Her husband's face remained completely expressionless. George seemed to be looking right through her as if Amanda wasn't even there. It all felt like some kind of hallucination. Such an unexpected encounter shook the doctor to the point that she almost fainted. Amanda didn't say a word except for a dry goodbye and left the house, feeling like she was part of some absurd comedy. Never before had she found herself in such a situation. Her own husband was cheating on her in broad daylight, spending time with his lover and little child. A child? Of course. How did I not think of that? She had his child. That makes sense. Children always bring people together. And what could I offer him? Amanda pondered on her way to the car. Seeing tears in her eyes, the driver grew concerned. Is something wrong? Did someone offend you? Amanda wiped her eyes with the handkerchief and shook her head. No, Bill, everything's fine, just some bad memories rushing back. The driver nodded mechanically and added, Well then, push those memories away. Think about something good and try to stay positive. Amanda forced a smile, though she felt torn inside. It was nearly at the end of her shift, so that call would probably be her last one for the day. Throughout the entire journey back, Amanda berated herself for her indecisiveness. According to Maggie, she should have caused a scene and demanded an explanation right there and then. But none of that happened, mostly thanks to Amanda herself. However, when she returned home, she decided to call her husband and settle everything once and for all. To her astonishment, George didn't only pick up the phone, but even switched to a video call so that Amanda could appreciate the geographical peculiarities of Colorado. Not only that, George acted as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't seen each other in that house on Main Street. God, how did he pull this off? Did he use the company's private jet? No, he wouldn't have enough time. There must be something else going on. But what? Amanda was puzzled, but she did her best to make her voice sound as natural as possible. Only then did Amanda realize that George probably didn't do anything wrong. He simply couldn't have gotten to the other side of the country in such a short time. Amanda couldn't fall asleep that night. The image of George's doppelganger raising a 5-year-old child kept swirling in her mind. Having barely managed to wait until morning, Amanda had a quick cup of coffee and called a cab to go back to the house on Main Street. When she rang the doorbell, she was ready to see anyone but her husband, George. Please forgive me. You will probably think I'm crazy, but I have a question for you. What's your name? Amanda mumbled, embarrassed by her own words. She felt like the man standing before her would start mocking her or even consider her insane. But what the man said truly shocked her. My name is James, ma'am. James Francis Bronson, to be precise. James? Amanda asked with a trembling voice. The homeowner smiled, then showed her his driver's license with his name and photo. Amanda turned pale. She couldn't believe her eyes. The answer was obvious. George had a twin brother whose existence he wasn't even aware of. 10 minutes later, Amanda, James, and his wife were sitting in the kitchen having tea. Pouring her heart out, the doctor told James everything she knew and even showed him a photo of her husband on her phone. The homeowner's amazement knew no bounds. As it turned out, James grew up in an orphanage and never knew his parents. George, meanwhile, grew up in a complete family. So, what was the catch? It took James and Amanda 2 days to figure out the truth. Invaluable information was provided by the former director of the orphanage. The man admitted that many years ago, twin brothers James and George got separated. One of the year-old brothers ended up in a foster family, while the other one was raised at the orphanage until he came of age. That was when everything became clear to Amanda. The truth was that George wasn't cheating on her, and he really was on a business trip. But the biggest surprise awaited Amanda a little later, when after George's return home from the business trip, she found out that she was pregnant. It was a true miracle. At first, she dismissed her fatigue as ordinary malaise, but the pregnancy test dispelled all of her doubts. Listening to his wife's disjointed account, George couldn't believe what had happened. Not only did Amanda find his brother, but she also blessed him with such joyful news. Seeing his brother with the little daughter, George couldn't hold back his tears. He felt like it was all just a dream, but reality quickly set everything straight. Apparently, miracles sometimes do happen in life, and Amanda and George's example served as a clear confirmation of that.